Thank you so much. Can I begin by extending my appreciation to the elders of the Darug Nation, who are the traditional owners of the lands where I'm presenting today, and welcome everybody else. My name's Karen Shea. I'm the Research Data Consultant at the Library for Western Sydney University. This presentation today details the implementation journey of Western's pure research management system and the unexpected benefits that we've realised after completion. It's not intended to be an advertisement for Elsevier or for the pure system at all, just a chronicle of our experience. So the tool that's described today that completed this work is Data Monitor, which is provided through the Pure platform. It's scheduled to be sunsetted at the end of this month, unfortunately, but it'll be replaced by a new integration which holds promise for the ongoing maintenance and validation of our dataset records. So in 2023, Western had a strong research data management policy and a training partnership with Intersect and several dedicated research support teams. Publishing and archiving was supported by an RDM consultant, yours truly, in the library. And my main role is training and advocacy at the beginning of the project, and then description, archiving, and publishing at completion. Redbox was and is central to our data publishing service. We were very early adopters of Redbox One, and I use it to describe the data sets at all stages of the research lifecycle, including DOI assignment and harvest of metadata to Research Data Australia for discovery. The library is a strong advocate for the use of persistent identifiers and was committed to the fair data principles, although we were falling down somewhat in the findable and accessible part. So despite this, there were actually several challenges, and our RDM plan compliance was very low, and awareness of data archiving and publishing through the library was even lower. Redbox was kind of holding us back a little bit too, because we hadn't funded any enhancements since 2019, and this resulted in some usability issues and really poor reporting. Critically, whilst Redbox stores its data in the archive, it doesn't offer a front-facing searchable repository for datasets. Users that were trying to browse Western datasets were redirected to the Research Data Australia portal as our only discovery layer. At the same time, our profile management system and institutional repository, which had historically focused on ERA eligible publications, they were both operating on outdated infrastructure with inefficient workflows. And the researchers themselves added another layer of complexity. Data archiving practices varied greatly across disciplines, and many science disciplines preferred publishing on third-party repositories to meet their audience, such as Dryad and OSF. So these repositories were not great because they're not indexed by RDA and other portals, which I'll remind you was our only layer of discovery. And the affiliation to Western on an authored record just wasn't great. So we had no oversight on these repositories and no process for adding any of these data sets to our collections for discovery. So in early 2023, Elsevier won the tender for providing a new research discovery portal with their Pure system. This system would, among other improvements, treat research data sets as distinct research outputs, and my brief was to prepare our data outputs for inclusion. In 2023, Western had 189 datasets discoverable via Research Data Australia. I was focused on steady incremental growth in our RDA presence by identifying completed research datasets through ongoing one-on-one RDM training and advocacy. At the same time, I conducted some database cleanup and consolidated and retired some datasets for greater clarity. So this cleanup work drastically reduced our presence on RDA to only 94 datasets, which is significantly lower than comparable institutions and gave us a very low starting point for discoverability. In line with other universities' practices, we developed a criteria for including secondary datasets in our RDA presence, namely those that were published in open repositories such as Dryad that had a WSU person as their first author. These locations were indexed in Redbox, and the record was subsequently harvested to RDA for greatly improved discovery. This marked a significant turning point and was well received by researchers because it allowed them to continue using those open sharing platforms that reach their target audiences, while also ensuring that their research profiles on RDA were more complete. So this practice, along with the data sets that we were finding and describing one by one, increased our presence to 249 on RDA at the end of October 24, just in time for the Pure implementation. The first run of the Data Monitor tool identified another 35 datasets, secondary datasets, for inclusion in both Pure and RDA. and I maintained both portals as like approximate duplicates of one another. They all met the same criteria. They had Western author as the first author. This number was a huge improvement, but it was still low and not representative of the outreach of the research volume that we should have been generating and our data sharing practices. The second run of the data monitor tool identified over 950 data sets for validation. Approximately 400 of these were identified as duplicates, and each record was viewed and merged or discarded. Of the remaining 550 data records, 83 of them were identified as Western first author, making them eligible for inclusion in RDA and into the Pure repository. If no current staff were on the record, then it was discarded because it ensured that we only represented research that was meaningfully connected to the institution at the time. So with these 83, I worked backwards until 2019 when the quality on the metadata started to be a bit patchy and the value of indexing records that were 5 and 6 and 7 years old started to become a little doubtful. And where possible, I made copies in Redbox of the actual data set just for good housekeeping. So the 400 or so records that remained had a Western affiliated author, but they were in the 2nd, 3rd or 23rd position on the data set. And we've never had any insight over these before, and we have no criteria for including them in our collections because it would seem disingenuous to call them Western research outputs. However, they did complete a picture for each individual researcher, and it was appropriate to include the data set on their profile. So I added those data sets where Western there was a first author and they were still employed by the university. And it supported a more complete academic profile in the new repository. So today, our research data repository in Pure holds 811 data sets, marking a transformative shift in how Western research data is discovered and showcased. From humble beginnings of 249 in October 2024, it's a growth of over 300% in 9 months. This work directly improves our first 2 FAIR data principles of findability and accessibility. But the real value of this is ensuring that our outputs are discoverable in as many places as possible, whenever and wherever the search is conducted. Researchers now have a more complete research data profile with their data sets hosted here and elsewhere, with relational links connecting authors, publications, data sets, projects, grants. It strengthens the profile, but it also reinforces Western's reputation in key research areas. So the impact of this work is probably best viewed on the individual profile of the researchers. Take Professor John Hunt, who is one of our more senior and established researchers in the School of Science. Before implementation, John and I had discussed data archiving, and he noted that most of his data sets were stored on Dryad already. At implementation time, only 2 of his data sets were published in our archive. And it gave the impression that he didn't engage in data archiving, potentially misrepresenting both his research practices and Western's data culture. So following the validation process, we validated 25 additional data sets found on Dryad. These were added to his profile and they created a far more accurate picture of the complete representation of his research contributions. Another example is Joyce Syatt. Through this process, we had identified 4 additional data sets on Figshare where she was listed as 2nd and 3rd author. Where John was the first author on his Dryad data sets, these were always also included in Redbox and RDA for discovery. But because Joyce was the 2nd author, they were only included in Pure and not RDA, as they were most likely published already by Macquarie University. I'm sure there's still more for both of these authors, but it's a great start to showcasing the full breadth of their research contributions. Importantly, there was no extra workload on the researcher to provide these through automatic discovery. An unexpected outcome of the Pure implementation was the identification of these 35 and 83 secondary data sets in third-party repositories where the Western researcher was first author. These were appropriate for description in Redbox and adding to RDA as well. And alongside the continual growth that we had in the repository, we increased our presence on RDA to 429 records, up from 249 the year before and 89 the year before that. The dotted line here shows the expected rate of growth that would have been achieved through outreach, training, and advocacy alone. The solid line is the massive uptick in entries that was achieved by these 2 one-time loads. The numbers are interesting, but the increased visibility has led to measurable engagement. If we look at the data sets identified by the data monitor tool in 2024, 35 secondary datasets added in November have received 1,075 views and 29 accesses through RDA, an average of 30 records per view in only 6 months. These figures reflect engagement, again, solely through RDA, not through Pure and not through the original repositories where they were published. It doesn't take 6 months either. The impact of description in RDA is instantly measurable. In May 25, I published 83 additional data sets from Data Monitor, and in just 3 weeks, they attracted 383 views on RDA alone, an average of 3 or 4 per record. Combining these two figures, we know that in just 6 months and 3 weeks respectively, over 1,400 interactions with these particular Western research data sets have occurred through RDA alone. Drawing these numbers out, this is over 8,000 predicted views and more than 60 potential accesses per year. This is the difference between our current state and our dotted line. Even if these interactions are bots or web crawlers, we don't care. They may be populating other indexes or other websites. It's still discovery as far as we're concerned. While the long-term connections and collaborations that this work has produced are difficult to quantify now, the improved discovery is an important step in amplifying the reach and impact of Western research. So what's the point of this? If we didn't do this, we risk invisibility. Our research institutes, our research individuals, and our institution itself. Without the discovery tool and the one-time loads, I would still be relying on slow growth to improve research data visibility. And at the previous rate of 5 datasets per month, it would have taken years to reach 429 in RDA and even longer to reach 811 now discoverable in Pure. So thanks to this work, the discoverability of Western research outputs has dramatically improved. Engagement has increased with over 1,400 interactions on RDA alone in just 6 months. And the visibility of researchers and their contributions is now much more complete and accurate. Impact potential is being maximised through better indexing, citation, and access, and supports the fair data principles. But perhaps most importantly, the true value of these connections is not yet fully realised, and it'll always be difficult to link discovery with impact. What we can measure now is engagement, but what we can't yet measure are the collaborations, citations, and innovations that may emerge from this. What's clear is the cost of inaction. Benign neglect of research data, particularly digital data, results in data loss. It results in duplicated research and poor discoverability. And some research without this work would have remained invisible, and some connections would never have been made. So what we learned in the process is with tools like Data Monitor being sunsetted, the RDM consultant service in the library has to remain agile. The job is it has to adapt, it has to scale, and it has to continually add value to the researchers, ensuring that new tools bring new opportunities and not new barriers. We learnt that PIDs have never ever been more important. This work harnesses the power of permanent identifiers to identify and cross-match outputs. Data outputs in RDA and Pure are aligned with our institution's raw number, and all datasets were discovered based on this or the author's affiliation on ORCID or Scopus. It provoked thought about how we use other discovery portals and indexes, and started conversations at the ground level with individual researchers about maintaining their ORCID profiles. The process formalised our repository inclusion criteria as well, and we now support better retention and disposal practices by our researchers, and it's aligned with similar criteria from our publications repository team. It forced me to have a look at both RDA and Pure and think about what reporting was available and what would be most useful for demonstrating impactful research outcomes. The improved level of discovery also transformed the library's RDM consultancy service from a somewhat invisible storage location to a really powerful relational data discovery offering. By providing improved research repository infrastructure and consultant support, the data citation and sharing became much more normative and even rewarding for researchers. And finally, in 2025, in the change environment, it also helped us to provide evidence of the importance of the work that the library does to amplify the reach, relevance, and impact of all of Western's research. Thank you very much, guys.